and get started. I wanted to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I got to meet most of you on the way in, but if I didn't, my name is Amanda. I'm the Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement here at Moravian. I just wanted to thank you all for coming out tonight, especially on Halloween. Tonight we've got a really special presentation. George Wacker is a member of the class of 2003, and he used to give ghost tours for the bookshop, so he's going to give us some stories and information about the different ghost stories from Bethlehem, a few from here, and we want to hear some from you guys as well if you have any from your time at Moravian. So I'm going to turn it over to George. Feel free to get up and get more food or anything like that throughout the night, okay? Enjoy.
Ideally, I would like to go without a microphone. So is this volume good? Can you hear me in the back?
What'd you say?
Always in trouble, so we should be fine to go. It's just a little easier to go through. And again, my name is George Wacker. I'm a class of 2003. I wish I could tell you that I was some sort of medium or I had some sort of connection to the ghostly world. That isn't true. I'm just interested in it. And I was lucky enough to be able to do some ghost tours. Well, my wife and I actually were able to do some co-ghost tours before we had a daughter, and we were able to do about 30 to 50 of them during the time that we did them with Moravian College. Those were walking tours, so if you guys want to leave and just do the whole walking tour, we can do that too. But since you're sitting here, you're lucky enough that I put together a presentation so I can bring it to you. This is the time I would tell everybody you're not allowed to smoke, and please make sure that your candles are lit properly, and silent your cell phones, that's a good one. Be respectful at all the locations, that was also a good one. And as we went along, there's going to be some places that I talk about, especially God's Acre, where we talk about photography. And I'm going to encourage that. You know, if you want to leave here and go up to God's Acre after you see some of the things we're going to see and take some photographs, I know that it's closed after dark, but you might be able to get in there on Halloween night. The one cool thing when I was giving ghost tours to almost groups of this size, honestly, when we were walking, was that a lot of them didn't go to Moravian, and a lot of them did not have knowledge of the area. And a lot of them didn't have some historical knowledge either. What I mean by that is I could get away with some stuff. So if there are factual inaccuracies in here, they're close. Like I might say 1700s. It was a broad time. So don't kill me on those. Also, if you have any questions, I'm happy to try to answer as much as I have been told or know. But also there may be people here who have answers to some of those questions. This tour is between 45 minutes or so and an hour, depending on how it goes. One of the interesting things about it is we're going to talk history, usually first, and then after that we're going to move into the ghost portion of it. So it's kind of a dual thing. Usually, when we had any kids on the tours, we try to keep it a little light, since I don't see any here tonight, besides maybe like you. I think we're good to go. So, those are my opening statements. And without further ado, we're going to start from some of the places that you guys obviously are aware of. That Bethlehem, Pennsylvania has a very historic and rich culture and history. I was just talking to someone before I even walked down here about the fact that the town is so old that almost every single building along Main Street has some sort of story to go along with it. People who have lived there, who have had apartments there, who have friends who have lived there, they all have some sort of ghost story to tell. So it's very easy to come up with some of these ghost stories. However, the ones that are picked for here, the ones that are picked for this particular presentation, are some of the ones that people thought would be a little bit more fun. So if you're ready to experience what it all has to offer, and again, if you have questions as you go through, if you want to talk about something, feel free. If not, we can talk at the end. And at the end of the presentation, when we get to that, we have some other ghost stories, and I'd love to hear any other new ones so that we can add them to something if we were able to do this in the future. Moravian College's South Campus, which you guys are very, I'm sure, familiar with. And this is pre-sign. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. So this is pre-sign. The ghost of the sign, maybe one day, take it down. One of the first buildings we want to talk about is the Brethren House, which was built in 1748. This was actually a hospital. Originally it was for the Moravian community where the single men would live. George Washington paid a visit to the Bethlehem community, liked it so much, or at least appreciated it enough, that he wanted it to be a military hospital during the Revolutionary War. So he brought up 250 soldiers who were wounded at that time during the war, and 110 of them promptly died, like over the course of that winter. Part of the reason was they were understaffed. The building wasn't large enough at that time for anything like that to happen. So a lot of the time, if you can picture the grounds with not so much built up at that time, there would be soldiers who were being taken care of outside. The lucky ones were maybe able to be taken care of inside, but there were a lot of them who were taken care of outside. It was a typhoid outbreak that closed the hospital down in 1778. And to this day, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of soldiers buried around these grounds, not so much here, but across the river in the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, which would be on the other side of 378. The reason they did that was to keep the bodies away from any sort of water source. So if you're not familiar with the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, I think it's on 1st Avenue, correct? They have no idea how many soldiers are buried there. They did have a record, but it was burnt in a fire in Washington, D.C. in the 1850s. So you will periodically hear stories. I think there was a professor here, I'll remember his name in a minute, Gary Olson. He was digging up his backyard. This was wild. He was digging his garden, and he unearthed some bones. And he called the police. There's some bones in my backyard. You might want to come check this out. And they were at least determined, I don't know exactly who they were, but they were determined to be from that time period. So there are still homes, or there are still areas where you'll still find that. So there are bones out there, we have no idea where they're from. Now, with that many deaths, with that much sadness going on in this area, you can expect there to be a lot of ghosts, a lot of apparitions, a lot of activity. Some of the famous ones, and we started really, I almost wish I could end with this one, but this is where the tour started in the beginning. But a lot of the stories here are probably some that you guys would have at the end. Some of the ones that tie in most with history tend to be the lady in white who patrols, who guards the top couple floors. A lot of people see her in the nighttime. And another one who is predominant is a man who is seen often in the basement, who's dressed in garb from about that time period, who seems to have a head wound. People have said they've gone up to this person, obviously a little bit startled, and they'll go up to him to ask if he's okay, and he immediately vanishes. Some of the legend that goes with it is the woman in white is a nurse who has been searching for the soldier, and she can't quite find him to heal him, who is in the basement. This is one where there are a lot of, like I said, stories that come from students. I have one personally, and I don't know if anybody else has experienced this or not, but I know that when I was going through here, when you get to some of the top of the steps in this building or some of the ones nearby it, they said if you were be on the top steps and say that you were for, if you were for the Confederate, I'm sorry, no, if you were for the British, you would get a push in the back. But if you were for the new nation, you'd be totally okay. One of my favorite stories, I was telling it right before I came up here, maybe to refresh myself. Some of you are before this or after this, but I went to school when AOL Instant Messenger was popular. And I remember this distinctly, and this is why I have a story of it. There was a friend of mine who was practicing piano in one of the rooms, and she was finishing up. She'd done this many, many times. And she was finishing up playing piano, and as she was leaving, putting her books in her bag, a couple seconds, 30 seconds here and there, started walking to the door, the piano started playing again. And she was someone who, I don't know about you, but she's like, nah. You know, she wasn't staying there to investigate or to have some fun. She left and went immediately to her computer, and I think I was one of the first people who she messaged and said, "You will not believe what happened. I'm never doing this again. I am not someone who believes in ghosts." The piano started playing on its own. I'm never going back in that room ever again. I have other stories again. This is one at the end. I'd love to hear if you guys have any as well. I know that the attic has been, there's a room, at least I don't know if it's called the attic, or there's one up top that has a lot of activity, which I know that there are people who have gone into in the past who've just felt, either a feeling of dread or just a lot of unusual coldness that shouldn't be there. Again, this is a scene of probably a lot of either gruesome deaths or just sad deaths. The fact that they were buried, I think, might mitigate some of that, which is good, but still, it's a very prominent area of that. We're going to go really far next door. Full disclosure, I own a company, and this is the only, I had to make this presentation, because again, it was usually a walking tour. So this is the one I had of Main Hall or near it. So she doesn't know she's in this, so don't tell her. This is this woman and her husband own tacos and all those. So if you ever meet Kara, tell her that you saw her at a ghost presentation. Because I didn't ask her permission. Main Hall. Is there anybody who stayed in Main Hall? All right. Great. So I'm going to get all of this incorrect then. Main Hall, obviously, I was not someone who spent overnight time there. Well, built in 1854, Main Hall has always been a woman's dorm. And if you've ever been inside, if you haven't been inside, for those who have, it's exquisite. I mean, it's one of the dorms where, some of the students come and they're like, I want to stay here. It's had high ceilings, the architecture is beautiful. There's a lot of, I haven't been in there in a while, but there's a lot of original type, art or other types of things. And antique paintings and that sort of thing. One of the fun things about Main Hall is a little bit less depressing than Bethlehem Hall. A lot of the ghost stories that come from it are more of stories of a ghost that we're not sure why she has the name Emily, but people have given her the name Emily, and she has been more of a precocious and annoying, troublemaker type ghost. Some of the stories are that she'll steal a hairbrush, only to have the roommates fight and fight. Like, why'd you take my hairbrush? And then it shows up in the same spot the next day. Emily may turn off lights, turn on lights. She might knock on doors. She might have a lot of fun with some of the co-eds there. There's a lot of talk about pulling of hair. Overall, just mischievousness. It's more of a lighthearted type ghost. However, there are stories that there might be more of a malevolent ghost. One of the most popular stories is that a student was on a bottom bunk, and she was awoken, looked up in the bunk, saw a terrifying face, rolled out of bed, like we all would, I guess, and as soon as she did that, the top bunk came crashing down to where she was laying. There's been another story where there was a co-ed who was studying very hard, and she felt like her hair was getting pulled. She was dealing with some of these annoying haunts, so to speak. And finally she had enough and said, Emily, stop it! And as soon as she said that, a light bulb above her exploded. And I know that some of you raised your hands. I'm really curious to hear some of that stuff maybe later on. There is some more lighthearted, enchanted type talk from Main Hall. One of them, I don't know if anyone can attest to this, but there is a mirror in there where they say is enchanted, where if you sit in front of it with someone you're with, and you were meant to be together, then you will look into the mirror and you will see an old couple staring back at you. It's supposed to be good luck. I've never tried it. I'm perfect. We're going to have that old chapel, which again, we're all in the area where many of you are very familiar. Old Chapel was the second place of worship. It was built in 1751. George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, Sam Adams, the Marquis de Lafayette. In 1792, the 51 chiefs of the Iroquois Nation, the 6 nations came here. I'm sorry if I got that incorrect. But they came here to worship. The whole point is that the community, this was a spot for them to worship. So if you've ever been inside, you're a part of history. Now, the Central Moravian Church, which is immediately across the street, replaced it in 1806. This is still used today by the Moravians. There's a lot of stuff that goes on during the holiday season. If you've never seen their plexes or some of the things that they do to raise money for the church, I recommend you go in there. And this isn't particularly haunted. There's not, when we think of haunted, I think sometimes we think, if anybody's seen the new Netflix show, The Haunting of Hill House, we think of that, where everyone's like, we're being, possessed by ghosts. If you haven't watched it, watch it. It's terrifying. I finished it last night, and I'm still I'm not sure what happened. I woke up and I'm not, writing notes down. It's really good. One of the stories within this particular building is more about the ethereal. There is a Moravian employee who, for whatever reason, didn't want to give her full name. And I kind of get that. You don't want people to constantly ask you about this. But so that she goes by Miss K. And I'm sure we're all familiar with the Moravians have an affinity for music. It'll be like that. It's been like that since the beginning, and I'm sure it'll be like that for centuries to come. So she was at one of the events where they were having a musical performance. She was seated in one of the pews. This was about in the early 2000s or so. As she is watching and listening to the music, as any of us would, she starts to notice that things are changing. And keep in mind, again, this is a Moravian employee, professional. She notices that things are changing. She sees even some of the things on the wall. They're kind of, the decorations are changing a little bit. And then she starts to notice that the people in front of her are starting to wear different clothing. She notices that they're wearing clothing that would be more attuned to maybe the 1700s or earlier time period. She couldn't quite make it out, but they weren't the clothes that you would be seeing everyone wearing tonight, or even in a church service. It's something a little bit older. She said that the energy in that room felt good and warm, and she was, happy. It wasn't something that she necessarily wanted to end. She felt like she was transported to a different time period. And as soon as she became aware of it, almost like when you're in a dream and you kind of figure out you're in a dream, boom, she snapped back to reality and looked around, and no one else had had the same experience. And she wasn't somebody who even really wanted to tell the story. She wasn't somebody who said, I want people to think that I'm, I don't want to say that I'm crazy, but just, thinking of things like that. But she was able to tell the story to some people and share it with some people who had other experiences as well. So now we've seen some of the ways that Moravians have celebrated life. Let's see how they celebrate death. That's what you call a segue. Worked on that. Because usually you would say that and it'd be really dark, and then you can walk up to the next part. And God's Acre would not be as light as it is here. God's Acre is really unique. Whenever the Moravians settled, they always put around, an acre of land, give or take, to bury their dead. And again, it was kept away from a water source. This particular one was founded in 1742. Excuse me. The first grave was the first person who was entombed. Well, I guess the first person's grave was John Muller in June 26th of 1742. One day after it was dedicated. And a couple interesting things, a couple facts. If you've ever read the book, The Last of the Mohicans, the Native American, his name is Shoup, who that was based on, he's buried there. You can find him, if you're facing that way, he's in the top left corner. There's about 2,600 graves or souls buried there. And the Moravians, interestingly, believed in something called the democracy of death. So you'll see that all of these tombs, or all the gravestones are flat. So why, people always ask, why are they flat? Because they believe in something called the democracy of death. So if you were the most important I use that term loosely, the most important or influential person in the society, the Moravian community, it didn't matter in death. In death, everyone was the same. In fact, there were slaves who were buried here. There were American Indians who were buried here, children. The most prominent of citizens, you would not know if you looked at the gravestone, other than some of them are newer than others. The Moravians, I don't want to say that they welcomed death, but they weren't afraid of it. Their traditional dress when they had a funeral was white. And if you know anything about God's Acre now, I think we're in the right, no, this is the opposite direction. If you were facing that way, you're looking at Moravian Academy. So I don't want to say it's a playground, but it's something where, there isn't this fear of death. They really believed that you were going back to where you came, you were completing a cycle, so it wasn't something that they feared. That being said, this picture was literally taken on a Moravian Ghost Shop tour, 2005 or 2004. Now, the person who took it, you're told no flash photography, and I'm a guy, the guys that adhere to that, it's just something that you don't do. And you're asked not to do it. Part of the reason they ask people not to smoke is because it's gross, it's not really good for you, so quit. But if people are smoking, you can always say, well, that was smoke. This was not taken anything like that. As you can see, there's flash photography, but there was nothing here. A lot of people say, it's a horse. That is creepy. And while we don't know anything particular about this photo, I can tell you a couple other stories. And there are a lot of stories. In fact, this one, and when we get to the Hotel Bethlehem, we can tell you stories. You can have your own presentation on those. One of the more popular ones is the woman in white, who if you take pictures of, I believe it's this tree here, and this one here. I mean, it's hard to really tell from this position. People have taken pictures where they can see a woman leaning outside of the tree holding her neck. People have witnessed that woman in person, while they're doing tours like this, or even during the daylight. Catherine Ramsay, who's a professor from DeSales University, she lives up the street. She's featured, if you watch the ID Discovery Channel, which, my wife calls me a middle-aged woman because that's like the only thing I watch. She's featured on there often, and she's someone who has done some research in terms of the paranormal. She is somebody who saw that ghost on that tree and said, I'm going to find out what's going on. The Moravian archives have a record of every single grave that is here. She went there and researched all of the graves around the tree and found out that one of the women who had died there had died from respiratory illness. Now, say what you will with that, but there are a lot of stories that go, with that story. There's a lot of people who have taken pictures of trees in that area and can see a woman with a bonnet, looking out. Some other creepy ones, or if you want to walk that way home if you're parked up there, people have seen things stirring in between the trees. And it's in one area, if you were to walk up from this area, it would be the first area you come into, the bottom left. So the southwest corner. During one tour, it wasn't mine, but it was a tour, they saw a lot of children, or not children, see, I blew it. They saw things running in between, they were dark figures, and they got freaked out by it. And people that actually didn't want to walk through the cemetery at that point, they walked up to make sure there weren't any kids there, make sure there weren't any dogs there. And again, they did the same thing. They were able to go back and research the graves that were in that area and found that a number of them were children's graves, which is creepy. One of the most, the way, again, you talk about segues, I'm going to lead you into one. There have been, everybody's aware, I talk about ID Discovery and these other ghosts, and we're going to talk about some ghost television shows. There have been a number of groups that have gone through and done things called EPVs, where they take a recorder and they ask a question, they record it, and then they'll go home and using computer technology enhance the audio. And there was a group from Northampton County that came through and said, hey, does anyone in here want to talk? And there was a ghost that distinctly said, please leave. And that's what I was saying. So now we're going to leave. And go on to our next one. But before we do, this is what, I know, somebody like this Bigfoot, right? But no, these are some, people believe that some of these orbs, I know that a lot of times people say that orbs are dust specks, you're picking up light. This is one that seems to have a little bit more motion than that. And again, this is one where if you really, I know it doesn't do it too much justice, but somebody was witnessing seeing the woman, and they took a picture while they were doing that, and then got that result. So this is a great place to take photographs, or not, if you're not into terrifying yourself, but I recommend it. Now, I put this map in, and I can't even tell where we are. So, okay, this is God's Acre. So we would be walking up, the Boyd's up here, so we would come out of here and walk up this way. So during that time, it was like, there's not a lot of ghosts here, so we had to tell some stories. So we had a few. So, one was called the Riverside Ghost. Ooh, wait. John Heckwelder, if you're familiar with Heckwelder Place is the small, almost alleyway between the Moravian Church and the old chapel. He was a Moravian missionary. He was a leader of the community, so to speak. Now, during the time period that he was alive, there were a lot of Moravians who were saying, hey, down by the river, there's a woman down there who's startling our livestock. We're bringing them down there to drink. And she's down there wearing white, and she won't leave, and our cattle won't drink, or our animals won't drink when we're down there. So they go to John because he's somebody who's going to, he's able to take care of problems with them. And John goes down, and he talks to this woman in white who's in the riverside, the eye. He comes back to the townspeople and he says, I got it figured out. No worries. This isn't a crazy story whatsoever. I talked to the lady, and it turns out that she's dead.
Wow.
She had fled here from Germany to escape someone, an abusive relationship. She had come from Bethlehem, from Germany, and she was so distraught and had felt so much distress and depression that she had drowned her children in the Lehigh River and then killed herself. So, she was doomed for eternity to stay there and haunt the river. It's called the Riverside Ghost. But they had said since he talked to her and had kind of accepted that, and then the townspeople had also accepted the story and wished her well, that she never returned again. Again, this is a story. But that's called the Riverside Ghost. The Nazareth Moravian Ghost, again, I'm sure some of you know that the Moravians didn't initially settle here. They settled in Nazareth initially. And from Nazareth, they traveled to Bethlehem. And along the way, the legend goes that they sang hymns. So they say on some very dark nights, I don't know how much this is worth, but they say New Street that comes up, and that would come up to God's Acre, that would meet with Church Street, and they come down this way, was one of the routes that they traveled. So they say late at night, 2, 3 in the morning, they would sing to each other hymns to comfort one another. And if you listen closely enough, and it's quiet enough, they say that you can hear them at night. The next one's my favorite. Bethlehem Club. I'm not sure what it is now. It's not really relevant. This is right across the street from the old bookshop that's at the corner of New Street and Market. Do you know what I mean? There used to be an old bookshop there. The Bethlehem Club is now an office building for some local businesses. It used to be the place where Bethlehem Steel the hierarchy, would essentially take their mistresses. And this is more or less a fact. This is somewhere where they could take their mistresses, they could drink. Now remember, a lot of the stories that we're going to tell were during the time of Prohibition. So this was a place where they could feel safe. They knew that no police were going to come in there. They were covered. The story goes that one evening, a wife finally had enough. And now, if this were to happen now, give me a break. But back then, maybe some wives would put up with this for a period of time. But one woman said, "I've had enough." And the legend goes, or there's at least one or two versions, that she came in and went up to the top steps, found her husband with the mistress, and cut off her head, and it rolled down to the first floor. The other story goes that she ran upstairs, found the mistress with her husband, and threw out the window. And the third one goes that the wife was so distraught to find her husband with the mistress that she jumped to her death from the second floor. Employees, and I've talked to one or two, that say that they experience doors slamming shut, they experience really weird temperature changes. It can be in the middle of summer, 80 degrees, and it can go down to 32 degrees in a second or two, and then go back up maybe in a minute. They hear all sorts of weird noises. Thankfully, this isn't something where people stay overnight, I don't think usually. So a lot of this stuff goes on during the day, and they're able to either rationalize it off or write it off. But this unassuming building has a dark past. Now, some of the stories I'm going to tell you are based on fact. This one has no fact. There's no written record of it. There's no newspaper report of it. So this is one that's just been told from people to people. There is one that we're going to get to that you can go home and research it tonight if you want. But just, because I want to give you clarity. I know, it's sad, right? See, it should say here, like, Avengers. Opening. The Boyd, if you're not familiar with the Boyd, it's been closed for, a better part of a decade. Due to multiple storms that have come through. I'm sure we've all seen movies there. I love going here. It started in 1921 as the Kurtz Theater. And it's been a theater ever since. The Kurtz Theater, though, is more vaudeville acts, which I always think is really fascinating. When you're thinking about Broad Street and where this is, the fact that vaudeville acts would travel from New York City or Philadelphia or other towns, and this would be their destination to entertain people in town. Like, that's, to me, kind of fascinating thing. They're on dirt roads. It changed its name to the Colonial in 1924, and then the A.R. Boyd Company bought it in 1934, and that's when they started doing more films. In 1996, there was a fire that did a lot of hurt to it, and it has since been sold to a developer, I think in 2011 or so, don't kill me, whenever Hurricane Sandy was, maybe that was 2012 or 13, when that came through, it tore the roof off, portions of it, pulled it up. I have friends who are firefighters in the Bethlehem firefighters who've gone in there and just said, there's absolutely nothing, which is unfortunate and sad. So hopefully this whole thing can be redeveloped. That would be the plan. That being said, you're here for ghosts, not sad stories. Well, not sad community development stories. Some interesting stories about the Boyd, more or less, are bad for women. A lot of them center around the women's bathroom. There are women who would go in there and they would, the drains in the floor that are like the metal drains that you can pick up and drop. They're small drains. They'd be in the bathroom. They would rattle. The lights would shake and turn on and off. They would hear people come in even though they knew they were by themselves. They would hear knocks and what have you. And then they would come out of the stall and there's nothing there. That's why I always would say, this was my joke when it would be open. That's why women are going to the bathroom in pairs at the Boyd Theater because they don't want to be murdered by a ghost. Some of the other ones, though, are a little bit more spiritual. One of the interesting stories is believe it or not, there were premieres here that had people, lining up at the door. We don't know the exact movie. It could have been Titanic. It could have been something else. But there were two women who had gone together and they had gone in. They're trying to get through the lobby. They got a little bit detached. So they get into the main theater area, and the first woman sees her friend in like a front row seat, waving back at her. She's like, "Yes, we got good seats for Leo." And they walk down. When she walks down again, she's kind of beaving and wobbling through the crowd. She gets down to that seat and it's empty. She said, why would my friend wave to me to come down to the seat and then leave? It doesn't make any sense. So she goes, well, maybe she went to get a better seat. Let me go back up. So she goes back up and walks out more toward the lobby, and her friend's in there getting food. And she goes, why did you flag me down to come down and sit with you in the front row and then come back up here and get food? And her friend goes, I haven't even made it in the theater yet. The Boyd, if you hadn't had the opportunity to be in, it was a beautiful theater, with the curtains that opened and closed. They still incorporated something called a ghost light, which they would keep on at all times. If you're familiar with the theater, some of those have them to keep people away. Now we're going to go on to my favorite stop. Which you're like, what? Wells Fargo Bank's horrible. I know it is. However, don't you look at this and you're like, this is a bank, makes sense. It used to be a bunch of different banks. This was actually built in 1925 as Bethlehem's first nightclub. Not a joke, total fact. It was called the Colony. And that's why you have all this architecture here. It operated as a nightclub for 25 years. Now remember, when it opened in 25, this was during Prohibition era. So this was the place where the mayor, the police officers, and mostly steel executives could go, drink, and who's gonna, in Bethlehem in 1925, there's no Twitter, no one's saying, hey, these guys are drinking illegally. So they could do what they will. And it was a nightclub for a long, long time. Until 1949, when 31-year-old Ruth Mickley was found murdered. Her head was bludgeoned in the basement on a couch. Head totally bashed in. And this is where I'm talking about true facts. This is something you can go Google today. It's an unsolved murder still in the city of Bethlehem. And at that time, it was such a big deal that they had brought in new technology called a lie detector test. And they had identified as many people as they can. They thought it was everybody who had attended the party that evening, tried the lie detector test, everybody passed. To this day is an unsolved murder. The weirdest thing, and this is also very true, is that Ruth Mickley's daughter was on one of the ghost tours in like 2012, had no idea that her mom's story was a part of it. Thankfully, she was very happy because people were still talking about it. But a little bit more serious, the reason you have an unsolved murder, and there's a lot of people who say that the basement of this building is maybe one of the most haunted places in the Lehigh Valley. And when I say haunted, I'm not talking kind of getting cold, there's that, or doors opening and closing, there's that. But there's more poltergeist activity where somebody would have a chair, walk out of the room, go back into the room, and the chair's destroyed in pieces. They would leave for 4 or 5 seconds and come back into that basement area, and there would be papers strewn about. There would be people who would walk into the basement area and get so sick to their stomach that they would vomit and need to leave. Now, again, this is a private building. It's very difficult to get in to that basement, and it's not something that they're really willing to do. I do have a story where when my wife and I married, and it was also a horror story to combine bank accounts, but we did. She had to come to Wells Fargo to cancel hers. And we're like, hey, you know what? We're here. We might not even come in this bank again. So we asked the teller, and forgive my language, we asked the teller, a younger teller, we're like, we've heard some stuff about about the basement. Do you ever go in the basement? Verbatim. No. I would never go into that basement ever again. But no, she was genuinely serious. And we're like, well, you know, we didn't get too much out of her. She just said it's not somewhere, nobody goes in there. When they have electricians that come in, they go in pairs. Nobody ever goes anywhere in that basement alone. Again, you know, this is a lot of hearsay, but it is an area where people are not generally allowed to get in. Our next stop is somewhere that you guys are all familiar with. I got married here, so I have a story here too. The Sun Inn was established in 1758. The Moravians were having so many guests that were coming. You got to imagine too, you're just a community with your own houses, and they were having so many people stopping in from, you know, wherever they were coming from, Philadelphia, New York City. The Moravians are, and still to this day, very accommodating people. They would have people stay at their homes, and not that they were tired of this, but they thought, we need a better solution, so they created the Sun Inn. You guys are familiar with the Sun Inn, I'm sure. I mean, the last dignitary who was there was Tom Wolfe 2 days ago, the governor of Pennsylvania, stopped in. But George Washington, John Hancock, John Adams, in a letter to his wife, said that it was the finest inn he's ever seen. There's debate if this was the first building in America that had running water. If it's not, it is one of. So it's amazing that it still exists, and the fact that it still exists is in the 60s, the city of Bethlehem was going to tear it down. We're not saying it's, you know, because the city of Bethlehem was horrible, it's just, it was an area that, whether it was blighted or what have you, it was an area that was slated for redevelopment. A woman by the name of Hugh Bender said, it's not happening. We're gonna save the Sun Inn, and she did. And to this day, they have the Sun Inn Association that protects the Sun Inn, was able to bring it back to a lot of its original grandeur. There's a tavern in there now. If you haven't been into the tavern, they have a bar in the upstairs and the downstairs. And this is a place that Ghost Hunters did a Christmas episode. If you haven't seen it, you can Google it pretty easily. So Ghost Hunters Christmas episode, I think it's about 6 or 7 years ago. In that episode, spoiler alert, in that episode they determined that there is a girl in the attic. They have found a handprint on the back of the chair through using heat technology, which is creepy. There are many ghost stories here. Some of the more popular ones are the more romantic ones. You know, this used to be a place where people would party. And they brought in an EVP, we talked about that earlier, where they would play piano, play God Save the Queen, and keep the recorder on top of the piano. And after they would finish playing God Save the Queen, in one particular instance, they finished playing piano, and then off they heard in the distance a voice saying, God Save the Queen, on EVP. There are a lot of stories on the second floor where you can take pictures from, what was that? Where you can take pictures from inside to outside. And there's a lot of reflection photos, which is kind of creepy. But there's been some, and they have them on display at the Sun Inn, where you can see it almost so distinctly that you can see the buckles on people's shoes. This has been an area where I've done 2 ghost tours. And I'm not like the ghost tour guy. I just find it really interesting. So I don't know how many they're going to do now with the tavern in place, but it's pretty interesting. In the attic, you know, they would place items like this and try to come back the next day to see if they were moved. And a lot of people say that they were. I don't have many direct ghost stories where I say I saw a ghost, but in the basement of the Sun Inn, in the men's bathroom, unbeknownst, well, when I went in there, we were doing a ghost hunt, you go to different areas. Never in my life, even to this day, have I been in an area where I was so compelled to leave by complete, utter fear, to the point of it was a life necessity, as in breathing. Like I needed, even now, like I think about it, it was very awkward and terrifying. and it was in order, like I needed to get out of there, so I'm like, hey, I gotta go to another spot, so I left. It was after that moment that I found out that that area of the Sun Inn, or at least close to that, is where they had a small jail for some Hessian soldiers during the time. And again, like I don't know, I can't tell you like there was a ghost there, but I have never felt a complete sense of dread to this day. It's just not something it's not a place that even it's during a music fest, and I know some of the people there, so let me go to the bathroom downstairs. I'm like, well, who's coming with me, because but the Sun-Inn's fascinating. It's another one where you can find a lot of stuff, you know, online or on your own. The Red Stag. You guys all know the Red Stag, kind of. This area is the old Bechtel house. George Wacker owned this property back during the time of the Revolutionary War. And this guy, this good-looking guy, right, is General Lafayette. Lafayette was injured in the Battle of Brandywine. They sent him up to the Sun Inn. We're not quite sure what happened, but they actually kicked him out of the Sun Inn. And they brought, this is true, they brought him over here, and at the time they said, there's a recording, there's a writing in a book that says he was like the dashing, good-looking man of his time. Like the Moravians wrote that, and they never wrote anything about people's appearance. So he was like the hot guy. So he goes here to this George Bechtel farm, and the problem is George Bechtel's like, you can totally recover here. He has a 17-year-old daughter named Liesel. Liesel falls in love with, you know, dashing Lafayette, and Lafayette, being the Frenchman he is, like, you know, I don't know what they did, but he eventually left and never called her, well, never wrote her a parchment back. And it is said that she, you know, she died longing for him. So the upstairs, not here, but there are apartments up here where there are many people who say they feel the feeling of someone getting in bed with them, and it's something where they, you know, they'll just feel a little bit of presence, or you know, the sheet will come up, and it's really weird. Another story that from here that doesn't have any real sense of why it exists is on New Year's, they always say that they hear the residents in some of the apartments. They smell cigar smoke, even no one's smoking cigars, and they hear the pop of champagne bottles, even though no one's popping them, which is a very specific type of haunting, and it's something that's really unique. We're going right to the Hotel B, because we could go through the Hotel Bethlehem. They have like a love-hate relationship, because you know certain times of the year in Hotel Bethlehem it works really well for them, like now. And then in the summer, I don't think there's so much we want to worry about so many ghosts. You know, they do well enough. If you're not familiar with how Hotel Bethlehem came to be, please know that that is where Bethlehem started. That is in 1741 when the first house was built. A replica of that house is in the Rose Garden, which is on 8th Avenue in Bethlehem. And it operated, it was used for a long period of time from 1823 to the 1920s as the Golden Eagle Hotel. One of the ghost stories from the Golden Eagle Hotel is that there were people called the Brongs, excuse me, and the Brongs were the caretakers who were appointed by the Moravians to take care of the hotel. And Mr. Brong was into like a different type of spirits. And so he was not very good at being a caretaker. And Mrs. Brong, it was rumored that, you know, she did something that was horrible to the point that they fired them. She would answer the door in her bare feet. And at that time, it was just totally unacceptable. So if you do see the ghost of a woman greeting you at the Hotel Bethlehem with bare feet, that would be Mrs. Brong from the Golden Eagle Hotel. In the 1920s, Charles Schwab, head of Bethlehem Steel at the time, realized that they needed a better hotel. You know, you have one of the biggest corporations in the world. We need somewhere to you know, coincide with that. So they built that in 1921. You can go to the hotel, even if you leave here, and find a pamphlet called The Friendly Ghosts of the Hotel Bethlehem. corruption-friendly ghosts. So I can tell you the quick story of one. Her name is Mei Yogi. And back in the 1860s or so, again, murder me, she would sing and dance at the Golden Eagle. She was like the Taylor Swift of her time, if the America was just Bethlehem. But seriously, she did so well that the Moravians put their money together to send her overseas to be properly trained. She became an international superstar, as much as you can at that time. I encourage you to look up, there's multiple books on Mei Yogi, it's Y-O-H-E. And she was one of the first women, she married a guy called Clinton Francis Hope Diamond. She was one of the first women to wear the Hope Diamond. And she was also one of the first women to be cursed by it. She fell into a divorce after that from him. She married multiple American, a soldier and then somebody else. They all ended in divorce. And she ended up penniless, I think, in the Boston area. It was a total tragedy, from beginning to end. She was top of the world to, there was a rumor that she was a maid in a hotel up in the Northeast. And it said that her childhood apparition, if you look at the hotel, if you look to the third floor of the hotel, the entrance, you can see an apparition of a young girl, and it's said to be her. And then you're like, well, wait, she lived to be kind of old. Why would her childhood apparition be there? And some people say it's because that was the time when she was actually happy. So her ghost resides there now. One of the craziest ones is room 932, which is even to this day. If you look up at the hotel from here, if you look all the way up, all the way to the left, that's room 932. 932 is booked all year long. It's said to be the scariest room in Bethlehem, if not the Lafayette Valley. They call it the room with the boot. Some of the stories that come out of room 932 are, you can stay there if you enjoy, waking up in the middle of the night with a guy with a top hat on saying, "Why are you in my bed?" You can stay there if you enjoy your windows opening and closing for absolutely no reason, even though if you've been there, these are solid windows, you just can't open and close like that. You can stay there if you like your TV turning off and on at all hours of the night, if you would like to have your temperature change from 80 degrees to 30 degrees, throughout the entire evening. And also, if you would like to go into the bathroom, which one woman said that she did, look in the mirror and see someone completely different looking back at her. But the thing is, there are people here right now who booked this room for that reason together. My wife and I were gonna book the room for not our honeymoon, for the night after, and we booked one like nearby, like maybe that'll be haunted, but I don't remember any of it. So we might have been haunted. We could have totally been haunted that night. We have done, so that's my wife right there. We have done a couple, they do something, I don't know if they still do it, but they have done some things where they'll have ghost tours and ghost haunts. So I would always check their Facebook or check some of the stuff. It's a lot of fun. I saw a door open, I don't know. But it's really cool to stay up late. They have all sorts of equipment and stuff, and it's a lot of fun to do. Before I get to some of these final things, I know that all of you are aware that the Moravian Bookshop has changed hands, and one of the things that really exacerbates hauntings, a lot of people say, is when there's construction. Well, there's a lot of construction going on at the Moravian Bookshop now, and again, that's one of the older buildings in the area, and there have been many reports of ghosts. One of my favorite ones that's hard to articulate, but if you can remember where like the kitchen would be in the back, one of the stories that I would be told a lot and would kind of end with before we go to a couple other things at the end here, is that there were two employees who were closing up for the night, and the kitchen would be in the back, and they saw someone who was still in the bookshop, and they're like, dude, you gotta get out of here. And he kind of runs through up to the front area to where the kitchen area, if you remember, the meadery would be back there, the cafe. and he went into the kitchen area. So one woman, I don't know why these guys didn't call the cops, but they get like a rolling pin and something else off a rack, and they're like, hey, I'm gonna go this way, you go the other hallway, and we'll meet him, and I guess cook him to death. And they get back there into the kitchen, and they find out that one of the stovetops has been left on full blast. Which is interesting because some people say, well, the ghost brought them back there to turn it off because it could have, burned the whole place down. And then there's other people who say the ghost did it, was going back there. So that being said, since there is a lot of construction going on in the bookshop, I would imagine that there'd be a lot of ghost stories going along with it. One interesting thing when I was putting this together, and this is hard to read, I don't even know like this, I guess. I guess kind of to point out, because you're not going to sit here and read these, but if you go to, even if you just Google Moravian College Ghost Stories, Moravian EDU, and I'll leave this up. Moravian College has put together a bunch of different ghost stories from people who have, gone to school here or who have time here, and they even they have a comment section, and they welcome you to submit your own. And this is just something I just found out about, that's why I kind of put it together quickly. And I know you're not going to sit here and read these here, so which is why I kind of said, here is the link to check it out, and also if you want to add your own. So that is my presentation. I haven't done one in 2 years, so hopefully that. If you don't, that's cool. I'm just curious.
Not really.
No? Does anybody have one? You don't have to. You can talk to us for a little bit.
This is not my story.
Listen.
This is, I only lived in Main Hall for 1 year, but this was a story that was told to me from some other girls that lived in Main Hall for longer than I did. They lived, I think, maybe on like the 3rd floor. Or thereabouts, and they had a lot of stories about Emily moving stuff, and just generally being a nuisance. And one story that stuck with me was that Emily used to try to distract them when they were studying, and so they would leave their door mostly closed, their door to the hallway, so that they could actually study. And that Emily used to creak it open to distract them, and then they would say, Emily, please close the door, and it would creak back shut. Yeah.
Somebody like move. Everybody else? Yeah.
I lived in this building, so the hill, when it was brand new.
This one?
And it's
Well, I guess because
here.
you're on land, so yeah.
Yes. And it's, and prior to that, I lived in main campus, and that was haunted enough. So I'm like, okay, great, this is a brand new building, there's gonna be no ghosts. That was our most haunted year at Moravian, was in this brand new building. Constant footsteps, I was on the 4th floor. Constant footsteps, constant banging. I would be in there totally alone, hear voices. And the walls, I don't know if anyone's ever been up in those rooms, they're like cinder blocks for walls, like you cannot hear each other through walls.
What's one of the interesting thing? I mean, it's such an old college. I mean, you're bound, just by the length of time, you have to have stories to go with it, which is why that's really cool that it's like poltergeist, you're like, we built on this land, and maybe.
And what's under it? I mean, with the
Hopefully
hospital
nothing bad.
right there.
But yeah, I mean, there's refreshment, you have it? Yeah, Comedians Hall, I'll tell you what, I'll be honest with you, the reason I don't have a lot of that on here is because I was kind of redoing the tour that I did for a couple years, which was mostly done just because enjoyment out. From Comedians Hall, I know there was a fire there, I know that they had a lot of ghosts there, I'm not as familiar. The one that I remember in Rao Hassler was, and I don't even know how true this is, like there were a couple rooms that were just cordoned off. because some kids had killed themselves in the 60s. And I'm sure in the 60s, there were like some kids killed themselves in the 40s. But that was a story that was definitely like past like the freshman year. The first Halloween of freshman year, 100%, like that was told to everybody because they would have a Halloween, what do you call it? A haunted house there, but you couldn't go into that area, like it was restricted. And I'm sure there's a reason for that, but that was the story that you were told. Definitely. I know Convenience Hall has to be. I wish but I mean that's why I would recommend. I must have this. Oh wait, this is my pocket. But that's what, like, yeah, I recommend go to like, or if you Google like Moravian College Ghosts, I think this is the first thing that comes up. I can't speak for the college. I know that since they took over the bookshop, they did some more tours this year, and I know that they're looking for more stories for next year. So you know if that's something that you have any to contribute.
I never saw him sing in the West Building, but I used to take violin lessons in that building, and I would sit outside and wait for the lesson that was going on to be over, and I would just feel creeped out just sitting there. I felt like it was.
I never felt weird on Moravian's campus, but on some other spots, and I don't think I'm somebody who's like attuned. Like I have friends who at least say that they're more sensitive to it. But that's always been fascinating.
It's an older part of the building, but there's a new part, and then you walk into the old part, and it's thick walls and doors, and it's just creepy just to be there when there's nobody.
The good thing with the Moravian College ghosts, at least that I've found, is that most of them are not bad. Like, if your ghost is stealing your cell phone, I'm like, I can deal with that, still murder me. Okay. But no, thank you guys so much. This kind of came. I want to thank Amanda and Bob. This is one of those things where I'm the vice president of the alumni board, and this is not something I have a full-time company that I run with my wife, and this is something that and Angie's a part of it as well. That we're a part of because we want to be. So it's really cool that you're here. If you want to learn anything more about the Alumni Association and events like this, and more events with wine, and I'm sure you've heard about like the shopping on Main Street and all sort of stuff. These are the types of events that it's just really neat. Like we were so happy that so many people signed up. So we hope that at the very least you look at future events and maybe take a second look at them and see if there's something for you. Thank you.